Hi, Jenny. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for coming on with me today.
Yes, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And you know what's really cool is that, Jenny, I really love what you do. And there's a big connection between what you do and what I do, in that, first of all, you are an amazing coaching, you're an amazing coach overall, but you really specialize in helping people develop their confidence after the breakup of a relationship or a major event in their life, and to be able to handle that before they move on in and meet somebody else, which is
hmm
where kind of I come in the dating world. But what I say to all of my clients, like, if they're missing this really important piece, a lot of times they're doomed to repeat not always maybe, but often they're doomed to
Yes.
repeat this past mistakes, and they wonder why they have such bad luck in meeting people. Well, there's
Yes.
one common denominator in all of that, right?
Yep.
So first of all, why did you get into that particular? That's fascinating, and I think it's so important for me. Confidence is really sexy, and it's attractive, and all of that, and it's fun. But what made you decide to get into this particular specialty?
Um, well, I guess it starts usually within. So usually I had to experience the pain and the devastation through divorce. And once you go through that, I think you have to learn, or if you don't continue to learn, like you said, you'll repeat the mistakes. And I've repeated the mistakes enough times that I realize that I have to create some change. And sometimes you don't realize you don't have that confidence, or you have this identity within yourself that doesn't match what you're attracting. So sometimes you have to just kind of look at that identity of what you're doing in your everyday life to figure out, okay, well, who am I? And you have to kind of do a reevaluation once you kind of have that breakup or that divorce. So you had to kind of reevaluate. And I think that comes with finding confidence. And sometimes you think you have the confidence and you realize, okay, maybe I didn't have it. I think that's the key thing is most people think that they're confident enough, but when they kind of look at it and they figure out, okay, this is who I am and this is what I've been doing. So maybe I'm not as confident as I think I am. And maybe it has to do with your identity. Like, who do I think I am and who do I want to become?
That's so interesting. And do you think a person's confidence, like how
Lose
they,
or
oh,
get rid of? We have it.
okay, sorry, there was just a little lag on my part. What was the last
Okay.
sentence you said? Sorry about that.
Uh, I think it's just sometimes it's, confidence and your identity are together. They're linked together. And we
Right,
don't always have that awareness.
right. So do you think a person's confidence, how they are, how they show up for their family, maybe, or for their work, for their colleagues, is a different type of confidence than when they're actually in like a romantic relationship?
Mhm. I do. I personally, I found that in my own experience, and then even with my clients, sometimes they're not in a relationship where they can really express themselves, or they don't feel confident enough to express themselves. And it's a different in a relationship too, right? Because you have more to lose or more to, depending on your partner, because your partner can punish you for sharing too much or too little.
Right.
If you don't have a partnership that you can actually trust and you have that open communication.
So where do you get started with someone that they know that they have some issues, right? And they can't really put their finger on it, but you know that you have the tools to be able to help them. And just from my perspective, where I think just to get it started, what I think is really important is for people to take care of themselves.
hmm
Right. What you're talking about maybe is something slightly different, but just to put a slightly different angle on it, if you really work on taking care of yourself, which part of it is getting to know all parts of you, which a lot of
Yeah.
times, especially as women, we don't necessarily do, or even as men, because we're taking care of our families, we're taking
hmm
care of our jobs, and a lot of us put our heart and soul into our jobs, right? So
Yep.
we're putting everybody else ahead of us, so we are kind of go on is who we are, and what we really need is put on the
hmm
sideline, right?
Yep.
So all of that I encompass in the under the thing of under the title of self-care,
Yep.
right? And that the more that you care for yourself, whether it's getting to know yourself and your boundaries and all that, or even physically taking care of you. So there's different ways of feeding yourself, right? And getting to know, and
hmm
even if it's physical, like working out and taking care of your physical body and whatnot will go a long way in developing your confidence. But what you're doing goes really deep, right? Like, where would you get started with someone with this?
Well, I think just looking at your values and figuring out who you are, because you have to understand your values so that you can link those values with the passion that you do. So whether it be, are you a coach or a nurse or a lawyer, whatever you are in life, if your values and don't match and you can't link them to what you are doing as a career, then it's really hard to find that fulfillment or that passion to kind of match up. Because one area you're dissatisfied, and the other area maybe you're more satisfied. But if you can't link those values together in your life, then you won't have that fulfillment, and that I think you lack that confidence too. And I think sometimes a lot of us in our identity, we like, if I was a coach and I link everything I have as a coach, I'm a coach, I'm a coach, I'm a coach, but that's not who I am. That's what I do. So I think sometimes we don't have that distinction. We link ourselves so much into our careers and who, that career, that's who we are, but that's really not who we are. That's what we do. And I think that's also trying in that self-care. But if you don't have that understanding that I'm not my job, then there's a differentiation in that. And I think people tie them together sometimes. So you kind of lose yourself in who you are.
Right. So therefore, it makes it harder to move on if you do lose your job or when you do
Hmm.
go to retire. And there's so many people, sad to say, that shortly after they retire, their health starts to deteriorate or things start to
Hmm.
happen. And, they lose their zest for life because they've so tied up their identity with their jobs. And maybe also we
Hmm.
can be tied up to our identity as a mother, for example. What
Hmm.
happens when our child leaves the nest? Right?
Yep.
Or as a wife or a husband, and all of a sudden we're
Yep.
not married anymore. So who are we? What are we
Yep.
left with? Right?
And that's a huge one right there is, when you think about your identity as a wife, if you were married or a husband, that's who you were. You were a mom or you were a dad, and when you tie that all up and then that's no longer there, where's your future? And that you lose the identity as what your future too,
Right.
you know? Who am I in the future? And this was what I thought my life was going to be. And now that's no longer because you're now getting a divorce. So that makes it really hard for you to move forward because what you thought your life would look like is gone. So you lose that kind of identity piece in your life as well.
Right. So how do you help people find themselves through all of this?
Really kind of on, because when you get married you kind of tie things together, right? You kind of weave everything together, so now we have to start to unweave it, and it's through the process of creating awareness and start to kind of look, what do you believe about this, what do you believe about that, what were your expectations, and how can we start to kind of manage those expectations, because a lot of times we have expectations and that kind of leads to suffering. So it's looking at how can we unweave what you thought you had and really go and start to work on what do you want to create.
This is such a worthwhile thing to do. You know what I mean? And whenever, and sometimes a shock like a divorce or a
Mhm.
separation, when you, in retrospect, it could be one of the best things that ever happened to you if it really forces you. Sometimes it takes a shock for us to really go into self-discovery mode, right?
Yes.
And in terms of improving our lives and our quality
Mhm.
of our life.
Yep.
Do you agree with that?
Yes. I always say it's like this big fat, the reset buttons from Staples, I think it is. It's a reset button. So you can actually have the opportunities. I always try to have them reframe it. How can we look at this as an opportunity? Where can you grow from this? Where can you start to say, okay, this is a reset for me, like you said, and how can I look at it as what I want to create in the future? What do I want it to look like? And then you get to design your own future and what it looks like. And you can create your new identity. Not that you're going to lose parts of you because you're totally whole and you're whole to begin with. So there's nothing to lose or gain. It's just you recreating and discovering those dark parts that you kind of haven't tapped into and really embracing those as gifts rather than, a heartbreak, and just look at it from a perspective of what lessons can I learn from this?
That's a really, really great thing that you just
Mhm.
said. And I think, I'm looking at my own life lessons because this is where we start from, right? When we're
Yes.
coaching others. And one of my greatest lessons from my divorce is that I was actually partly responsible for for the mess that we ended up in our divorce.
Yes.
because for many years, 11 years after the divorce, I just continued to, go with this propaganda that I was the victim, he was the nasty one, it was all his
Yeah.
fault, but
Yeah.
in reality, for every victim, for every perpetrator, if you will, or nasty
Yeah.
person, there's someone that's playing the role also, right? So the
Absolutely,
victim.
absolutely. I mean, and I think we all play victim at some level, especially if we're the ones that didn't want the divorce. So it's easy to go into that mode because then we don't have to look at our dark parts or the parts of us that we didn't want to own up to. But
Yeah.
it is like you said, I mean, that's one of my biggest lessons. I've been on both sides. And when you are the one that didn't choose to leave, then it's easy to play victim and it feels good to be there because you don't have to be you don't have any responsibility. So it's easy to go there. But what I've taught like a lot of my clients is that you're not the victim. You played some role, even if you kind of buried your head in the sand and you decided I'm just going to ignore what's going on. You ignored it. So you didn't pay attention to it and you didn't address it while it was there. So at some point we all, whether, they cheated on you, if they cheated on you, it's easy to blame them. And people see that,
Mm-hmm.
from the outside, but when you look at it even closer, you realize that, what, I played a bigger role in that. And what I think one of the biggest things that I find is most people, relationships stay together because when they only will they stay together if there's enough value. If the person that you're with perceives enough value to stay, but as soon as they see enough value to go somewhere else to be with someone else, they're going to leave. And that's
Right.
true for anyone. Like if there's not enough value in the relationship for them to continue to stay, then they're not going to stay. And it's not, I know it sounds kind of harsh, but when you have enough, but and that's also, how much am I giving to the relationship? So, okay, he went somewhere else, but what was I not doing to keep the relationship going too? What could I have done differently so that I could have added value to the relationship so that we could have stayed together? Could have stayed connected.
Mm. So what you're saying, I think, is super important because it could just put together the whole foundation, establish the foundation for your next relationship. And there's
Mhm.
one thing in there that I think is really important, and that is once you have addressed something like that and it comes out, like for
Mhm.
example, that I wasn't the victim, so what was my role in it?
Yeah.
That was one of the most empowering experiences, realizations that I
Yeah.
ever had. Because if I wasn't a victim, that means I could have done something about it. That means I always have a
Absolutely.
choice, right?
Yes.
And that was such a beautiful realization, even though I was kind of ashamed of the fact that I stayed and all that. And I'm sure many of us are, we put up with a lot of crap and we don't, we put our heads in the sand, but it's really, and we think it's the easy way out, but it's really the hard way, right?
It is the
So
hard way.
it is
Yep.
the hard way. So all I want to
It
say
is the hard way.
is that it's really important that you give that attention, that you just don't say, you talk to a great coach like you and a person has that kind of realization and they say, oh yeah, you're right. And then they go about their daily things and then they gradually forget about it. And the next relationship comes along. You really have to get this piece, right? If you're
Yes.
really serious about moving on and developing that relationship confidence, you really have to get this piece and talk about it, right? Talk
Absolutely.
about it more
Absolutely.
than once, integrate it. And one of my biggest lessons too is being compassionate with myself if I feel myself in my new relationship going into that same pattern. But at least I
Mhm.
see myself going there and go, oh, I see what I'm doing here. Right.
Yep.
And you rate the course. Right. So not to beat
Yep.
yourself up if you still have that tendency.
Mhm.
Right. But to learn from it, to bring that awareness there and do something about it.
Absolutely. And I think what you said a really good thing is, you once you've been there, you might go there again, but you're not going to spend as much time there.
Yes.
You're going to recognize the behaviors and the triggers. And once you have the awareness, you can't unlearn it. It's hard because you want to unlearn. You're like, I don't want to see this because now you realize you have to do something about it. And I think that's one of the things which you said is it's totally empowering. But once you realize that you do have the power, maybe when you're in a relationship, then you're not happy and you realize, okay, I know I can do something about it, but you may not know what to do about it. And I think that's sometimes a lot of where people get stuck is in relationships. They know that there's something wrong. They know that but what do I do about it once I have the awareness? And that's the hardest part is, reaching out for help, getting someone to help you get through that because you may not know the answers. And most of the time people think, oh, that I have to figure it out myself. But most of the time, I think if I would have reached out, I would have had more success had I had the courage to ask for help.
Right. Right. That is so amazing. That kind of takes us to the end of our interview, but I think this was super valuable, and especially during COVID, because we're all going through different types of pressures, and that puts our relationships under a certain amount of pressure,
Yes.
right? So shining an awareness on this, that the relationship confidence stems from knowing yourself and your
Mhm.
tendencies, and having an awareness to do something about it, either because you've already developed the tools because of the work you've already done, or
Yeah.
reaching out to someone that can help you, because by putting your head in the sand, we all pay the price for that, right? It doesn't go
You
away.
pay, it does not go away, and it's only going to grow and grow and grow. And you know that, and I think the other thing is I've learned is trust your instinct. So if you don't, you trust that part of you that says there's something not right here, let's address it and let's figure it out. And if you can't, then, get your partner and use some help. Like there's lots of things out there, lots of places to go. And don't bury yourself, like you said, in the sand, because there's so many. And now is a great time, especially during COVID, to really understand and get to know yourself, because there's so many resources, especially online now, that there's no reason why you shouldn't reach out for the help and get into anything that will help you, whether it be coaching, whether it be, counseling, whether it be, a group of people, or talking to someone like you.
Or you.
Talk to anyone that can help you get through this, because there's so much, you know, so many resources available right now.
I think it's the best gift you could ever give yourself. It's the best
Yes,
gift that I ever gave myself. And especially during the
absolutely.
holidays, don't just look at giving to everybody around you, which is a
No.
beautiful thing. Give primarily to yourself, because the more you have, the more you take care of yourself, the more you have to give to others,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
with a lot of love and compassion. So thanks everybody
Absolutely.
who's tuned in today and will be listening in the replay. And thank you so much, Jenny. This was really great. This was
Yes.
very timely, I believe.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.